Have you ever loved someone so deeply that you couldn't let go, even when that love shattered your heart? This is the story of Xayah, Rakan, and Olaf, a tragic love triangle filled with betrayal and resentment, driving them to irreversible crossroads. Can love be powerful enough to overcome all mistakes? Join us in exploring this emotional tale, where every moment is a battle between the heart and the mind. Xayah and Rakan were once known as an inseparable pair, two souls intertwined in love and ideals. Their love was as beautiful as the songs Rakan would sing just for Xayah, each note a promise that he would always be by her side. Their life in Ionia was simple but filled with joy. Xayah, with her deep purple eyes, always found light in Rakan's smile. He gave her the belief that the world, despite its harshness, could still hold beauty. After that stormy night, something shifted within Xayah. She couldn't erase the tenderness in Olaf's gaze from her mind, nor could she deny the sense of security he brought her. Yet, at the same time, the guilt within her deepened. She tried to convince herself that what she felt was merely gratitude, that her love for Rakan remained unwavering. But deep down, she knew she was lying to herself. Olaf continued to appear in her life, not more frequently, nor with any intention to draw attention to himself. He simply helped her quietly, spoke with her, and cared for her in a way that felt natural. Those small gestures, though seemingly insignificant, gradually became an irreplaceable part of Xayah's long and lonely days. Each time he left, she felt a void she couldn't name. In the evenings by the fire, Xayah and Olaf often talked about everything. About the brutal battles they had endured, about memories from before the war, and sometimes about Rakan. Olaf always spoke of Rakan with respect and affection, but this only made Xayah's heart feel heavier. One day, as Olaf was repairing the roof damaged by the wind, Xayah stood below, her eyes unintentionally following his every movement. There was something about his diligence and devotion that made her feel protected, a feeling she hadn't experienced since the day Rakan left. But as soon as she realized it, she quickly turned away, trying to dispel the thoughts creeping into her mind. She told herself everything would be okay. One day, Rakan would return, bringing back the smiles and songs she had always cherished. But as time passed, that belief grew increasingly fragile. The letters from Rakan had stopped coming, and each passing day only deepened her fears that something terrible had happened to him. In that emptiness, Xayah began to seek solace in Olaf's presence, a fact she knew she shouldn't accept. One night, as moonlight poured through the window, Xayah sat by the fire, her hands gently holding Rakan's scarf. Olaf sat across from her, silently observing. He said nothing, but his gaze carried something she dared not confront. "Do you ever think about what we've lost?" Xayah asked suddenly, her voice soft but heavy with sorrow. "All the time," Olaf replied, his eyes distant. "But sometimes, the only thing we can do is keep living, even when everything has changed." Those words felt like an affirmation Xayah didn't want to hear. She lowered her head, unable to respond. But the feeling that she was being drawn into a relationship she shouldn't have grew stronger. Over time, the closeness between Xayah and Olaf began to cross the boundaries of friendship. It wasn't something they intended, but loneliness and pain had drawn them closer than ever. Each accidental touch, each lingering gaze, carried emotions neither of them dared to admit. One evening, after Xayah was injured in an ambush by mercenaries, Olaf carried her back home. He tended to her wounds, his eyes filled with worry. "You can't keep putting yourself in danger like this," he said, his voice a mixture of frustration and concern. "You need to take care of yourself." Xayah looked at him, her violet eyes reflecting exhaustion and helplessness. "I don't know what else I can do," she whispered. "Everything I once believed in seems to be slipping away." Olaf didn't respond, but his eyes said it all. He wanted to comfort her, to let her know she wasn't alone. But he also knew that if they crossed the line, things would never be the same. The tension reached its peak on a stormy night. Trapped in the small house, the fire crackling warmly in the cold space, Xayah sat on a chair, staring into the flames, while Olaf leaned against the window, a glass of wine in hand. "Olaf," Xayah broke the silence unexpectedly, Do you think we can ever go back to how things were? When everything was simple, Olaf looked at her, his eyes full of inner conflict.
No, Xayah.
What's changed can't go back to how it was. But that doesn't mean we can't find something else. His words sent a tremor through Xayah's heart. She stood, stepping closer to him. They looked at each other in silence, and in that moment, all the boundaries they had tried to uphold crumbled. Xayah didn't know who moved first, but before she realized it, the distance between them had disappeared. A kiss, gentle yet painful, shattered every unspoken rule. That night, Xayah and Olaf crossed the line, letting their emotions carry them away. When dawn broke, Xayah sat by the bed, her eyes gazing out the window. Guilt and remorse surged within her, but deep down, she couldn't deny that. For the first time in years, she no longer felt alone. Yet she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. But war never allows happiness to last. The waves of Noxian invasion began to sweep across Ionia, and Rakan, driven by uncontainable zeal, decided to join the resistance army. He fought not only to protect his homeland, but also to dream of a future where the world they shared could find peace. On the day he left, his eyes radiated unwavering faith as he looked at her. "I will come back, Xayah, and when I do, we'll rebuild everything together." Xayah forced a smile, though her heart clenched. She knew those promises were filled with determination, but also risk. She held him tightly, feeling his warmth one last time before he stepped out the door. When the door closed, Xayah's world became colder than ever. In the early days of their separation, Xayah held on to hope. She worked tirelessly to protect her village from small raiding parties while finding solace in the letters Rakan sent. Each line he wrote brought her comfort, as if he were still by her side. But war was not as forgiving as they had imagined. The letters from Rakan grew sparse until one day, they stopped altogether. Time passed, and the long, lonely nights began to erode Xayah's spirit. She tried to keep faith that Rakan was still safe, but the absence of news made her feel as though she was waiting for something that would never return. Loneliness weighed heavier on her each day, turning her into a shadow of herself. It was during this period that Olaf entered her life. As Rakan's closest friend, Olaf had fought alongside him in the early days of the war. After sustaining an injury, he returned to Ionia to recover. Knowing that Rakan had entrusted him with protecting Xayah in his absence, Olaf began to visit her more frequently. Olaf was a strong but straightforward man, carrying the air of a seasoned warrior. He helped Xayah repair her damaged home and defended her from minor threats like mercenaries and bandits. His presence, though it couldn't replace Rakan, gave Xayah a sense of safety she hadn't felt in a long time. At first, Xayah was simply grateful to Olaf. She saw him as a friend, a reliable companion in troubled times. But as time went on, his presence grew familiar. He not only assisted her with daily tasks, but also listened to her deepest fears and sorrows. The longing for Rakan, the feeling of abandonment, and the gnawing fear that she might never see him again. Olaf wasn't a man of many words, but when he looked at her, his eyes held a tenderness that Xayah couldn't ignore. Gradually, she began to realize that, deep down, she relied on Olaf more than she had thought. Every time he left, she felt an emptiness she didn't want to admit. On long evenings by the fireplace, with the wind outside blending into their quiet conversations, Xayah began to notice a subtle shift within herself. Memories of Rakan still lingered, but they were now overshadowed by Olaf's presence. She told herself it was only a moment of weakness, that her love for Rakan could never be replaced. But the truth, no matter how much she denied it, became clearer with each passing day. One stormy night, Xayah found herself stranded in the forest while searching for medicine for injured villagers. Exhausted and bleeding from a wound on her shoulder, she couldn't take another step. Just then, Olaf appeared, bringing with him a rescue she hadn't expected. He carried her through the freezing rain, each step slow but steady. When they reached her home, he laid her on the bed, his eyes filled with concern as he tended to her wound. "You can't keep doing this, Xayah," he said softly, his deep voice carrying a gentle admonition. You need to be protected, and I'll always be here for you. His words caused Xayah's heart to waver. She didn't respond, lying there as she felt the warmth in his gaze. In that moment, she knew she had stepped too close to Olaf, a step she could never take back. Xayah knew she shouldn't succumb to weakness, but loneliness had opened a door she never thought she would cross. The sun slowly descended beyond the horizon, its fading light casting a golden hue on the path leading to the small house where Xayah had lived in solitude for years. From a distance, the rhythmic sound of hooves echoed, strong and resolute, breaking the stillness of the twilight. Atop a battle-worn horse, a familiar figure emerged, Rakan. He had returned after years of war. His eyes bore the exhaustion of countless battles, yet they carried the hope of reuniting with the wife he had cherished. When the door of the house opened, Xayah appeared, standing still as she looked at him. Time seemed to freeze. Rakan smiled, a warm, hopeful smile, but he failed to notice the unease flickering in Xayah's gaze. "I promised I'd come back," he said, his voice hoarse yet steady. "And now, I've kept that promise." Xayah didn't know how to respond. She wanted to run into his arms, to feel the warmth she had longed for all these years. But memories of Olaf, of nights when emotions had overpowered reason, held her back. "I'm glad you're home," she replied, her voice so soft even she barely recognized it. In the first few days, Rakan spent his time repairing the house, helping Xayah with the harvest, and talking about their plans for the future. He spoke of the brutal battles he had fought, the comrades he had lost, and the hopes he had clung to during his time away. But the more time Xayah spent with him, the heavier the guilt grew in her heart. She knew that Olaf's presence in her life couldn't remain a secret forever. At first, Rakan didn't notice anything unusual, but gradually he began to sense a change in Xayah's demeanor. She no longer looked him in the eye as she once did, and every time he mentioned Olaf, she quickly changed the subject. One day, when Rakan casually brought up memories of his and Olaf's time on the battlefield, Xayah dropped the bowl she was holding. "I'm sorry," she stammered, hastily picking up the pieces. But her nervousness didn't escape Rakan's watchful eyes. Rakan began to notice small details he had overlooked before. A silver bracelet bearing a Freljordian symbol lay, tucked away in Xayah's drawer. Something he knew wasn't his. Some items in the house were arranged differently, as if another hand had once touched them. His growing suspicions gnawed at him, though he didn't want to believe Xayah was hiding something from him. The truth finally came to light one day when Rakan found an old piece of paper tucked in a corner of the house. It bore a short handwritten note from Olaf. "Take care of yourself, Xayah. I'll always be here for you." The words felt like a dagger plunging into Rakan's trust. His heart clenched, but he said nothing. He needed to hear the truth from Xayah herself. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Rakan broke the silence. "Xayah, is there something you need to tell me?" His voice was calm, but his sharp gaze left no room for evasion. Xayah froze, her eyes dropping to the floor as if searching for an escape. I don't know how to say this," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "Rakan, I never wanted to hurt you, but I can't keep hiding the truth." Her words made Rakan stiffen. He felt the instability in her tone, and his chest tightened.
No riddles, Xayah.
"Tell me what happened." Xayah took a deep breath, as if summoning every ounce of courage she had left. "Olaf and we crossed the line of friendship," she said, her voice breaking. "It was a mistake, something I never wanted to happen. But I can't deny the truth." Her confession hit Rakan like a storm, shattering everything inside him. He shot to his feet, his eyes blazing with anger and pain. "Olaf? The man I called my brother? The man I trusted to protect you?" His voice was heavy with betrayal and bitterness. Xayah couldn't muster a response. She simply lowered her head, tears streaming down her cheeks.
I'm sorry, Rakan.
"I don't expect your forgiveness, but I want you to know, I've always loved you." But her words couldn't mend the devastation in Rakan's heart. He stared at her for a long time, as if trying to find a trace of the woman he once loved. All he saw now were fragments of what used to be. "Love?" he said with a hollow laugh, colder than anything she'd ever heard. "You call this love, Xayah?" The next morning, Rakan left, carrying his shattered heart with him. He didn't say goodbye, didn't look back at Xayah even once. She stood in the doorway, watching his silhouette fade into the sunlight. She knew she had lost him, perhaps forever. In the days that followed, Xayah lived in silence, the emptiness consuming her. Everything she had loved and believed in was now a painful memory. But deep down, she knew the storm was far from over. Rakan, the man she had once loved above all else, had stepped into the shadows, and there was nothing she could do to bring him back. Rakan wandered through the desolate lands, where the shadows of war lingered like a cruel reminder. Within him, the belief in love, in everything he had once fought to protect, had completely crumbled. The once radiant light of his wings was now nothing more than an empty symbol. Rakan no longer fought for ideals. He fought to forget the pain, to bury the betrayal that had torn his heart apart. He joined a band of mercenaries, men who lived without purpose beyond seeking bloodshed and chaos. In brutal battles, Rakan recklessly threw himself into danger as if daring fate to claim him. Yet even the screams of the battlefield and the sensation of his blade cutting through enemies couldn't soothe the ache in his heart. Rumors of Rakan began to spread across Ionia. Those who had once known him, a shining warrior, a devoted husband, could no longer recognize the cold, hollow man he had become. Tales of a warrior with shadowed wings who brought fear wherever he went terrified many. But for Xayah, those stories brought deep anguish. She knew that darkness was consuming Rakan, and it all stemmed from her own mistakes. Xayah could no longer remain silent. She knew she had to find him, to face him, no matter the cost. With a light pack and a heart heavy with guilt, she left her small home and began her journey to find Rakan. After days of searching, Xayah arrived in a ruined land, once a peaceful village now ravaged by war. Charred walls and ground torn apart by battle were all that remained. At the heart of the devastation, she saw a group of mercenaries gathered around a large fire, and among them there was Rakan. He stood there, his gaze cold and lifeless, his once brilliant wings now shrouded in darkness. He neither spoke nor smiled, simply staring into the flames, as if they were the only thing left in the world. Xayah stepped closer, her heart pounding, not with fear, but with the weight of seeing the man she once loved now a stranger. "Rakan," she called, her voice breaking the eerie silence. All the mercenaries turned to look, but Rakan's expression didn't change. After a moment, he slowly raised his head, his eyes icy as they met hers. "Xayah," he said, his voice rough and devoid of emotion. "Why are you here?" She stepped closer, her legs trembling under the weight of guilt and fear. "I came to apologize. I know what I did is unforgivable, but I can't let you continue like this. I can't stand by and watch you destroy yourself." Rakan laughed bitterly, the sound echoing across the camp. "Apologize? After everything you did, you think an apology will erase it all? You and Olaf killed the man I used to be. Now, I'm just a ghost." Xayah's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't retreat. "Rakan, I don't expect your forgiveness, but I love you. I've never stopped loving you. Even when I made mistakes, my love for you never changed." Her words did nothing to soften Rakan. He spread his wings, the sharp, blade-like feathers glinting in the firelight. "Love me? You say you love me, yet you betrayed me. Don't talk to me about love, Xayah. It's nothing but a lie." Before she could respond, Rakan lunged forward, his wings slicing through the air and creating a dangerous whirlwind. Xayah was forced to dodge, avoiding his strikes. Her heart ached as she realized he didn't just want to hurt her with words. He truly wanted to destroy her. "Rakan, stop!" she cried, dodging his attacks while trying to stay calm. "I don't want to fight you, but I want to fight you," Rakan roared, his eyes burning with deep-seated pain. "I want you to feel the agony you've caused me." The battle between them was fierce. Xayah only defended herself while Rakan attacked relentlessly. She didn't want to hurt him, but his strength, now fueled by rage and despair, was overwhelming. Each strike he delivered carried the weight of his suffering, and each time Xayah evaded him, she felt as though she was adding salt to his wounds. In the midst of the chaos, a voice rang out. Olaf emerged from the shadows, rushing between them. He had been following Xayah, knowing she couldn't face Rakan alone. "Rakan, if you want revenge, take it out on me," Olaf shouted. "I'm the one who deserves your wrath, not her." Olaf's arrival only inflamed Rakan further. "You destroyed everything, Olaf. My love, my trust, my life. All because of you." He charged at Olaf, and the two men clashed in a violent fight that no one could stop. Xayah could only stand and watch, tears streaming down her face, as the man she loved and the man who once comforted her fought like mortal enemies. The battle ended when Olaf collapsed, blood staining Rakan's hands. As Olaf took his final breaths, he spoke to Rakan. "You don't have to forgive me, but don't let hatred destroy you and destroy her." Rakan stood over Olaf, silently watching his closest friend slip away. But instead of softening, his gaze became emptier. He turned to Xayah, his eyes devoid of any light she once knew. "You both killed the man I used to be," he said, his voice weary. "There's nothing left to save now." Rakan turned and walked away, leaving Xayah and Olaf's lifeless body behind in the cold night. Xayah collapsed to the ground, her sobs carried away by the wind. She knew she had lost Rakan forever. The pale dawn light illuminated the barren land where Xayah knelt beside Olaf's lifeless body. The cold wind rustled her tangled hair, but she felt nothing beyond the emptiness consuming her heart. Beneath a large, ancient tree, Xayah buried Olaf. Every stroke of the shovel cutting into the earth felt like a blade slicing into her soul. When the grave was finally complete, she stood silently, her gaze fixed on Olaf's silver bracelet, now resting on the grave as her final farewell. "You deserved a better ending than this," she whispered, clutching the worn scarf in her trembling hands. "I was wrong, and all that's left are the shattered pieces of an irreparable mistake." But no words could change the truth. Olaf was gone, and with his passing, a part of Xayah had died as well. Xayah embarked on a solitary journey. She left the village, carrying with her broken memories and a heavy heart. Each step took her through familiar lands, places that once bore the imprints of her happiness with Rakan. The memories played like silent films in her mind. Rakan's radiant smile as he held her, his eyes gleaming as he sang under the moonlight, and his brilliant wings shielding her in their earliest battles. But now they were only haunting ghosts. She wondered how far she had gone to lose everything she once held dear. Guilt and longing tormented her relentlessly, a constant reminder that no one escapes the consequences of their mistakes. One day, Xayah paused by a riverbank. The crystal-clear water reflected her weary face and pale violet eyes that once sparkled with life, now shadowed by despair. She remembered the night she first met Rakan, when his smile had chased away the darkness in her heart. "Rakan," she whispered, but his name vanished into the wind. She knew he was still alive, but his heart had been buried beneath the darkness she and Olaf had helped create. She wondered if there was still a chance to mend what was broken or if it was all in vain. Elsewhere, Rakan stood on a high hill, his wings spread wide, the fading sunlight reflecting off the feathers tinged with shadow. The cold wind carried the scent of burnt grass and ash, but he felt nothing. Everything that had once given his life meaning, love, trust, ideals, had become wounds that would never heal. As he looked toward the horizon, where free birds soared, he thought of Xayah. He had once believed their love was strong enough to overcome any trial, but now, bitterness was all he felt. Love. He repeated the word in his mind, but it brought only emptiness. Time passed, but the pain did not fade. Xayah and Rakan continued to live, but neither truly existed. They were trapped in shattered memories, each day a reminder that the happiness they once shared was now nothing more than ashes. Xayah spent the rest of her life protecting the weak in Ionia, as a way to atone for her mistakes. She fought tirelessly, not for ideals but to escape the pain that consumed her. Yet every night, sitting alone under the moonlight, she still whispered Rakan's name, hoping that somewhere he had found the peace she couldn't give him. As for Rakan, though he tried to forget the past, he couldn't escape Xayah's shadow. In every battle, every time he spread his wings, he felt her presence. Even though he knew it was just an illusion, he couldn't forgive her, yet he couldn't stop loving her. And that was his greatest tragedy. To love someone who had broken his heart but whom he could never let go. One day, they stood on opposite ends of the world, looking up at the same sky. Neither knew that in that moment, they were thinking of each other. The distance between them, whether in space or time, no longer mattered. Their love, though twisted by pain and betrayal, still lingered, a faint flame that neither warmed nor died out. They had lost each other, but deep down, they knew that love never truly disappears. It exists somewhere, amid the scars and fragments, waiting to be found again, even if only in memory. The story ends with the remnants of love and loss, leaving unanswered questions. Xayah and Rakan, though separated in body and soul, remained bound by memories and pain. A love that once burned brightly was now reduced to ashes, yet its flame, however dim, refused to extinguish. What do you think about the character's actions? Was Xayah to blame for her weakness in loneliness? Could Rakan ever forgive her? And Olaf, was he a betrayer or a sacrifice in the name of love? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more emotional tales. We'd love to hear your perspective. Can love forgive all mistakes? Or are there wounds that never heal? Share your thoughts now.